Hello and welcome to Reading Review Week 33. Glad you guys could join us. Entered into a new book. So we jumped from Nehemiah to Esther. So there's some Nehemiah, some Esther this week, but Esther's a good book. I've been enjoying it. And so we're just ready to jump in and see what jumped out. Did you want to start?
I can, I guess.
Okay.
I chose Esther chapter 3. I think Esther's a pretty familiar story for most of us. Even if you haven't read through the Bible before, most people have heard of, how courageous Esther was going before the king. So I chose to focus on another part of the story. I chose Esther chapter 3 verses 8 and 9, and it talks about when Haman was coming before the king to tell him that there was a group of people that are keeping themselves separate and that their laws are different from everyone else's and they don't obey the king's law. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If the king approves, let an order be drawn up. So he was out to get Mordecai, specifically, who was a Jew, that refused to bow down to what Haman's demands were. And back then, a lot of the Jews that lived amongst the pagans, even though they were Jews, they were living like the pagans did. But Mordecai stood out. He was different. He was a faithful Jew. He was still abiding by the laws that God had put in place. He wasn't a Jew just by name. He again was following the law. And just how we know today that a lot of people call themselves Christians but aren't true Christ followers. So there's kind of a parallel there that we want to remember, like Mordecai was faithful. We want to be found faithful and not just call ourselves Christians, but be an actual true Christ follower in the world that we live in, with all the things going on that people are trying to get us to follow or bow down to, so to speak. But we want to be found faithful as Mordecai was found faithful. That's an encouragement to me to read how he was living like we're living in the world, but not of the world.
Right, and I think that's, Haman was quite like the world is today, because he wanted everybody to bow down, and it irritated him that Mordecai wouldn't bow down, and that kind of leads into what I pulled out. It was from Esther chapter 5, verses 9 through 13. It says, "That day Haman left full of joy and good spirits. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and Mordecai didn't rise or tremble in fear at his presence, Haman was filled with rage toward Mordecai. Yet Haman controlled himself and went home. He sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh to join him. Then Haman described for them his glorious wealth and his many sons. He told them all how the king had honored him and promoted him in rank over the other officials. What's more, Haman added, Queen Esther invited no one but me to join the king at the banquet she had prepared. I am invited again tomorrow to join her with the king. Still, none of this satisfies me, since I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate all the time." And the reason I even picked that out or jumped out at me was the same thing about Haman being like the world today. And you have to understand that when somebody doesn't love Jesus, and when we talk about the love of Jesus and it stirs up something in them that irritates them, it doesn't matter. All the good things that can come their way, all of the many benefits that they get, that none of that matters. All they're going to see is the anger that they have because we keep talking about Jesus. And you can see that sometimes in people. Like it doesn't matter. They've got a good job. They've got all these things. I mean, that's what Haman was sitting there going, look, I've got all these kids. I've got all these wealth. I'm able to I was the only one called to dinner with the king and queen. And, but even that wasn't enough, because this one guy would not give him the honor that he felt he was due. And so he was willing to throw it all away because of that. And, I think that we need to recognize that we're not always going to please the world, and we shouldn't want to. That's what Haman or Mordecai was about. He's like,
he looked different, and his commitment to God is what stirred up that conflict, and sometimes that happens.
Right.
Even when we're trying to avoid it because of Jesus in us.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So we need to, remember that.
Yep.
Very good.
Just keep asking the Lord to change our hearts to, keep us different.
Make us different. That's
Yep.
right. All right. Then we had Corinthians, 1 Corinthians.
I wrote down chapter 10. Let's see. Chapter 10. It kind of course, Paul talking the letter to the Corinthians and wanting them to be aware and reminding them again in a couple places in Corinthians. In verse 6, it says, these things took place as examples to us, that we will not desire evil things as they did, talking about the Israelite people and the things that they did. And then a little further down in verse 11, it says, these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our instruction. So again, he's trying to remind us about the things that happened to the Israelites to remind us. And then he goes on to talk about the temptation, because we know the Israelites kept falling back into the same things, and how we need to be aware. But verse 13 says, no temptation has come upon you except what is common to humanity. So sometimes I feel like the enemy, when he comes along to tempt us, he wants us to feel like nobody else understands, nobody else is going through what you are going through. But Paul tells us right there, it's common to humanity. We all go through temptation. Even Christ was tempted when he was here. So, and he gives us a promise then that he's not going to allow us to be tempted beyond what you are able. He's going to be with us. He's going to provide that way out. We just have to be willing to seek him and to pray to him to get through those tough times, to not fall back into that same thing over and over.
Right. And, that is Satan wants to isolate us, because when we're isolated, then we feel alone. We feel like, there is no help. Nobody, understands. Nobody's coming. But Jesus is, hey, listen, you're going to be tempted, or the scripture here, you're going to be tempted, but there's going to be a way out. So there's always going to be a way provided. So you just need to be looking for it. And we're not tempted beyond what everybody else, we all struggle. And I talked about that a little bit in the sermon this morning. We all have our struggles, and these trials and temptations are to build our faith and to help us see. And so, yeah. Now, I went to, kind of goes along with this, but 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 24 through 26. It says, God has put this body together, giving greater honor to the less honorable, so that there would be no division in the body, but that the members would have the same concern for each other. So if one member suffers, all the members suffer with it. If one member is honored, all the members rejoice with it. And I think that, this kind of goes back to that we are one body and we're all connected. And when things are going well, we all are honored together. We're all, rejoicing together. But when somebody's suffering, then we're all suffering, and we should come alongside them, and we should encourage them and help them. And so we need to make sure that, we find that unity that God has brought, and don't allow temptations or struggles to separate us. Because sometimes that's the first thing you want to do when you're going through something, is you want to keep yourself, away from everybody else. That's what Satan keeps drawing us toward. Like, oh, don't go there because, then you're going to have to, you don't want to be around those people right now. And that's those thoughts that go in your head. But you need to get around that body because, again, when one member suffers, all members suffer with it. And that's what, God has designed the body for. And then when we can rejoice with each other as we are overcoming these sufferings that we're going through. And that kind of goes into Psalm 36. I chose verses 5 through 7 out of that, and it says, Lord, your faithful love reaches to heaven, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the highest mountains, your judgments like the deepest sea. Lord, you preserve people and animals. How priceless your faithful love is, God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings. So see, even in those struggles, even in those times that we're going through those problems, God reaches down from heaven and his love wraps around us and is with us so that we can take refuge in the shadow of his wings.
Very nice.
Oh.
I wrote down Proverbs 21:21. The one who pursues righteousness and faithful love will find life, righteousness, and honor. So again, it's just about pursuing the righteousness, and not that we would get overconfident and think that we can't fall to those temptations, but just to keep pursuing his righteousness, staying near to the Lord, because we can't do it on our own, but we have to have his help with us. But again, just to keep pursuing righteousness.
That's right. Seeking first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. That's what we should be doing every day. And if we do that first, then we are going to be, lifted up in him. And so I think that's a good wrap to another great week of reading. Esther, again, is a great book, and Haman is quite the character. Even I kind of looked at, as he was being accused in front of the king, and the king went out to the garden, and Haman's like trying to get the queen, Haman trying to get the queen to listen, and he stumbles over and falls on the couch, and the king enters and it's like, what are you doing to my wife? And it's just like, it's a great read. So I've been really
and
enjoying
to
it.
realize that God had planned it from the very beginning, even having Mordecai and Esther there at that time, as as for such a time as this, that he planned all those things that had to be just right, even from him spoiling the plot to kill the king that Mordecai found out, and that how God used all of that in every piece.
That's right.
It's pretty amazing.
So you beginning to read through the Bible this year and attending our church with us and watching this video right now, maybe it was for such a time as this. God will use it. Just watch him and be looking for where he's leading. All right, you guys have a great rest of your week in the Lord.